Picture a small settlement somewhere in ancient Europe. The time is approximately 12,000 years ago, early in the human-dog relationship, early enough that the animal sleeping near the entrance of the shelter is not quite the domesticated dog of later millennia, but something in between, a creature whose ancestors were wolves and whose descendants will be retrievers and shepherds, and the thing currently sitting on your couch acting like it owns the place. Inside the shelter, a woman is in the late stages of pregnancy. Her abdomen is large enough to make movement difficult. Sleep is interrupted. The vulnerability that comes with advanced pregnancy in a world without hospitals, without obstetric care in any modern sense, without antibiotics, without anything to address complications beyond the accumulated knowledge of experienced women in the community, that vulnerability is total and real in a way that modern pregnancy in developed countries has largely obscured. And the dog at the entrance is not sleeping as deeply as it appears. This scene, repeated across thousands of settlements, across thousands of years, across the entire geographic range where early dogs and humans coexisted, is the foundation of a relationship between pregnant women and dogs that has been almost completely overlooked in the historical and anthropological literature, despite being one of the most practically significant aspects of early dog domestication. We know dogs helped ancient humans hunt. We know they helped with herding. We know they served as sentinels against predators and rival groups. We know from the archaeological record that dogs were sometimes buried with care that indicates emotional significance. What we discuss far less is what dogs were doing specifically for pregnant women and mothers in the critical period surrounding birth, a period during which the vulnerability of both mother and infant was at its maximum, during which the protective functions that dogs provided would have had their most direct and consequential impact on survival and reproductive success. This is that story. Begin with the baseline vulnerability of pregnancy in the ancient world, because understanding what protection was needed requires understanding what the threats actually were. Pregnancy changes a woman's physical capabilities significantly. In the final trimester, mobility is reduced. The ability to move quickly, to flee a predator, to respond physically to a threat, is substantially compromised. Sleep becomes fragmented and lighter. The sensory alertness that characterizes healthy adult humans in dangerous environments is partially degraded by the physiological demands of late pregnancy, including hormonal changes that affect sleep architecture, and the cognitive load of managing the body's increasing demands. Simultaneously, the pregnant woman carries a developing infant whose survival represents an enormous biological investment. The energetic cost of human pregnancy is substantial, approximately 80,000 additional calories above baseline metabolic requirements for the full gestation period. The months of nutritional investment, the physiological stress, the social resources directed toward a pregnant group member. All of this represents an investment whose return is the successful birth of a viable infant. Anything that threatens the pregnancy, the birth, or the immediate postnatal period threatens to eliminate that entire investment. The threats were real and multiple. Large predators, wolves, bears, big cats depending on the geographic region, were attracted to settlements by food smells, by the presence of small animals, and by the vulnerability signals that any large predator's perceptual system is calibrated to detect. A woman in late pregnancy moves differently, breathes differently, emits different scent profiles, and presents a different acoustic signature than a non-pregnant adult. To a predator assessing potential prey, these differences are informative in specific ways. Rival human groups also represented threats, and the vulnerability of pregnant women and new mothers to violence from rival groups is documented across historical and ethnographic records. Raids on settled communities targeted members who could not effectively fight or flee. Children, elderly individuals, and pregnant women were at elevated risk during intergroup conflict precisely because their mobility and combat capability were reduced. Within the settlement, social dynamics during pregnancy and early postpartum periods could also create vulnerability. Competition for resources in food-stressed communities, social tensions around reproductive success, and the simple reality that a woman focused on a newborn infant has reduced capacity to monitor and respond to her broader social environment. All of these created conditions where a sentinel capable of monitoring the social and physical environment independently of the vulnerable woman's capacity to do so was genuinely valuable. This is where the dog enters the analysis, not as a metaphorical protector, but as a biological security system with capabilities specifically suited to the vulnerabilities of pregnancy and early motherhood. The sensory capabilities of early domestic dogs were, and in modern dogs remain, dramatically superior to human sensory capabilities in the dimensions most relevant to threat detection. Canine olfaction, the ability to detect and identify scent molecules in the environment, operates at a sensitivity approximately 10,000 to 100,000 times greater than human olfaction, depending on the specific compound being detected. The number of olfactory receptor cells in a dog's nose ranges from approximately 125 million to 300 million depending on breed, compared to approximately 6 million in humans. The practical consequence of this olfactory superiority is that a dog sleeping near the entrance of a shelter detects the scent of an approaching predator or unfamiliar human at a distance and under conditions where no human sensory system would register anything unusual. A bear approaching upwind from 200 meters is invisible, inaudible, and undetectable by any human sense. The dog knows it is there. Canine hearing extends into frequency ranges above and below human hearing and is substantially more sensitive within the shared range. Dogs can detect sounds at roughly 4 times the distance that humans can detect the same sounds, and their ability to localize the direction of a sound source, to identify where a sound is coming from, is substantially more precise than human directional hearing. A dog asleep in a shelter can detect and localize the sound of movement at a distance, and in conditions where a sleeping human would register nothing. These sensory capabilities did not emerge with domestication. They were present in the wolf ancestors of domestic dogs and represent the sensory inheritance that domestication preserved, while other aspects of wolf behavior were modified toward greater human compatibility. Early proto-dogs and early domestic dogs carried the full wolf sensory arsenal into the human domestic context, providing human settlements with a sentinel capability that no other available technology could replicate. The alerting behavior of dogs, the barking, growling, and postural signaling that communicates detected threats to nearby humans, converts individual sensory detection into a collective warning system. A dog that detects something alarming and vocalizes wakes the entire settlement, converting its individual sensory advantage into a community-wide alarm that allows group members to respond collectively rather than individually to threats. For a sleeping pregnant woman in a dark shelter, this alarm function was the difference between waking with time to respond and waking to an immediate threat at close range. The specific value of this alarm function for pregnant women is amplified by the sleep changes of late pregnancy. Pregnant women in the final trimester experience disrupted sleep architecture. More frequent waking, reduced deep sleep, lighter overall sleep, that partially compromises the recovery benefits of sleep, while also reducing the depth of unconsciousness during sleep periods. A woman who is already sleeping lightly has faster response time to an alarm than a person in deep sleep, but she also has less physiological buffer against the threat of waking to a threat that is already close. The dog's early warning extends the response window, waking the pregnant woman and others in the settlement while threats are still distant rather than immediate, providing time for the collective defense response that the vulnerable individual's reduced individual capability requires. The territorial behavior of domestic dogs, the establishment, and defense of a spatial zone around the home base represents a second protective mechanism whose specific value for pregnant women and new mothers is distinct from its general protective function for the settlement. Dogs in home-based contexts establish familiarity with the normal sensory landscape of their territory. The regular smells, sounds, and visual features that constitute the background against which anomalies are detected. This baseline familiarity makes dogs more sensitive to change than any human monitoring of the same environment could be, because dogs are continuously and automatically monitoring against their established baseline in a way that human attention, which must be deliberately directed, cannot maintain. Any intrusion into the established territory, a new scent, an unfamiliar sound at an unusual distance, the movement of something through a monitored space, triggers the dog's alert response relative to the established baseline. The pregnant woman sleeping in the settlement does not need to consciously monitor her environment. The dog is doing it automatically, continuously, at a sensory resolution that human monitoring could not approach even if it were maintained with full conscious attention. This continuous passive monitoring is particularly valuable during the postpartum period, the weeks immediately following birth, when the new mother's attention is necessarily concentrated on the helpless newborn who requires continuous monitoring and responsive care. A new mother cannot simultaneously maintain full environmental awareness and provide the intensive care that a newborn human requires. The dog's passive environmental monitoring fills the awareness gap that the newborn's care demands create. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Newborn human infants produce sounds. The distinctive vocalizations of crying, the respiratory sounds of breathing, the occasional quiet vocalizations of sleep, that carry at the acoustic frequencies most accessible to human hearing and therefore potentially to predators with similar hearing ranges. The sounds of an infant can attract predators whose predatory interest in small, helpless prey is aroused by the acoustic signature of infant vocalizations. This creates an acoustic vulnerability for mothers with newborns in environments with active predators. A dog positioned near a sleeping mother and infant provides a sentinel specifically against this predator attraction risk. The same dog that alerts to approaching threats also interposes itself physically between the threat source and the vulnerable individuals it has bonded with, providing both advance warning and a physical deterrent that increases the cost of predatory approach. The bonding between dogs and individuals within a household or group is a well-documented feature of domestic dog behavior. Dogs form attachment relationships with humans that are distinct from their general tolerance of household members, and these attachment relationships influence protective behavior. Dogs show more vigilant and more active protective responses toward bonded individuals than toward less familiar group members. Pregnant women and new mothers who maintained close physical proximity with dogs, who slept near them, fed them, interacted with them regularly, would have developed bonded relationships that directed the dog's protective behavior towards them. The dog's protective responses were not generic to any member of the settlement, but calibrated by bonding to the individuals with whom the dog had the closest relationship. This means pregnant women who cultivated close relationships with dogs received directed protection rather than incidental protection as a byproduct of the dog's general settlement guardianship. The warmth that dogs provide is another protective function relevant to the postnatal period and to the vulnerable newborn. Neonatal humans are extraordinarily susceptible to hypothermia. Their thermoregulatory systems are immature at birth, and their body mass to surface area ratio makes heat loss much faster relative to heat generation capacity than in adults. In cold environments, maintaining neonatal body temperature was a significant practical challenge that affected infant survival rates. A dog sleeping near or against a mother and newborn provided a significant additional heat source. A large, warm body with a metabolic heat output of several hundred watts whose proximity directly reduced the rate of heat loss from both mother and infant. In shelters without modern insulation or heating, animal body heat was a meaningful thermal resource, and the dog's willingness to sleep in close physical proximity to humans was a distinguishing feature of domestic dogs compared to their wolf ancestors. Archaeological evidence from multiple Paleolithic and early Neolithic sites includes dog skeletal remains in close proximity to human remains in ways consistent with dogs sleeping near individuals rather than simply cohabiting a general space. Some burial sites include dogs buried with individual humans in configurations that suggest they were companions in life to those people, with the burial arrangement reflecting the spatial relationship they maintained while living. The question of whether dogs were present during birth and the immediate postpartum period cannot be directly answered from archaeological evidence. The moment of birth leaves no skeletal trace, and behavioral events do not fossilize. But the circumstantial evidence from the continuous proximity of dogs to domestic human spaces, from the bonding behaviors that concentrate dog attention on individuals, and from the general sentinel and warming functions already described strongly, suggests that dogs present in the settlement were present near pregnant and laboring women and near newborns in the immediate postpartum period. Ethnographic evidence from cultures that maintained close human dog relationships into the historical and modern periods provides additional perspective. In multiple documented cultures, dogs were present during birth and the immediate postnatal period, with their behavior ranging from quiet proximity to active alerting at the sounds of distress to the licking of newborns. A behavior that in wolf social contexts functions to stimulate neonatal breathing and circulation in newborn pups, and which some ethnographic accounts describe dogs performing on human newborns in traditional communities, where close human-dog cohabitation was the norm. Whether dogs licking human newborns provided the same physiological stimulation benefit that wolf mothers licking provides to wolf pups is unknown. The physiological contexts differ in significant ways. But the behavioral tendency of dogs toward this licking response in the presence of newborns reflects the deep behavioral continuity between wolf maternal behavior and domestic dog behavior in neonatal contexts, and suggests that dogs in close proximity to human births were not passive observers, but behaviorally engaged participants in a way consistent with their evolutionary behavioral heritage. The microbiological dimension of dog presence near newborns is an aspect of this topic that deserves acknowledgement with appropriate complexity. Modern understanding of the human microbiome, the community of microorganisms inhabiting the human body and influencing immune function, metabolic health, and disease resistance, has revealed that early microbial exposure during the neonatal period significantly shapes the developing immune system in ways that have long-term health consequences. Exposure to diverse microbial environments in early life is associated with reduced rates of allergic and autoimmune conditions in later life, a relationship described by the old friends hypothesis. Dog presence in the immediate neonatal environment provides microbial exposure to the newborn from the dog's skin, coat, oral environment, and the surfaces the dog contacts. The microorganisms introduced by dog contact are diverse and include organisms that human immune systems evolved in the presence of across the long co-evolutionary period of human-canid contact. Modern research has found that infants in households with dogs show different microbiome composition in early life compared to infants in dog-free households, with some evidence of associated immune benefits. In the ancient context, where the concept of microbiome did not exist and no one was thinking about immune programming, the microbial exposure provided by close contact with dogs was an unintentional but potentially beneficial consequence of the proximity relationship. The ancient pregnant woman sleeping near a dog was not thinking about neonatal immune programming. The dog was not providing intentional microbial therapy. But the exposure was real, and its immune consequences may have been positive in ways that contributed to infant survival in environments with high pathogen challenge. The psychological dimension of dog presence for pregnant women in the ancient context represents the most difficult to quantify, but potentially most immediately meaningful aspect of this protective relationship. Modern research on the psychophysiology of human-dog interaction has established that contact with bonded dogs reduces cortisol, the primary stress hormone, and increases oxytocin, the hormone associated with social bonding, trust, and relaxation, in ways that are measurable in both the human and the dog involved in the interaction. Elevated cortisol during pregnancy is associated with adverse outcomes, including preterm birth, reduced fetal growth, and developmental consequences for the infant. The stress of pregnancy in an ancient environment, with its real physical threats, its social demands, its nutritional uncertainties, would have been a continuous source of cortisol elevation. Any relationship that consistently reduced cortisol in a pregnant woman would have had direct beneficial effects on pregnancy outcomes, not through any mystical mechanism, but through the well-established physiological pathways connecting chronic stress to adverse pregnancy outcomes. A bonded dog provided physical warmth, sensory reassurance through its calm behavioral state. Dogs in secure, familiar environments communicate security through their own relaxed behavior in ways that their bonded human companions read and respond to physiologically. Tactile comfort through physical contact, and the cortisol-reducing, oxytocin-elevating neurochemical effects of human-dog interaction that modern research has characterized. The pregnant woman who stroked her dog in the evening was not consciously managing her stress hormones, but she was doing it. The sleep quality implications follow directly from the stress reduction. Reduced cortisol in the evening is associated with better sleep initiation and better sleep quality. An important benefit for a pregnant woman whose sleep was already compromised by the physiological demands of late pregnancy. A dog whose calm presence and alert sentinel functions simultaneously reduced anxiety and provided genuine security monitoring created conditions where the pregnant woman could achieve better sleep quality than she could without this combination of reassurance and genuine protection. Better sleep during pregnancy is not a comfort luxury. It is a health determinant with direct consequences for fetal development, maternal immune function, metabolic regulation, and psychological resilience, all of which are directly relevant to pregnancy outcomes and the health of the newborn. The full picture of how ancient dogs protected pregnant humans before and during birth is therefore neither simple nor reducible to a single mechanism. It is a multi-layered suite of protective functions. Sentinel detection of threats, territorial monitoring, warmth provision, microbial exposure, stress reduction, sleep quality improvement that operated simultaneously and complementarily during the period of greatest vulnerability in the human reproductive cycle. None of these protective functions required the dog to understand pregnancy. None required the ancient human to consciously recognize the protective value of the dog's presence for any of these specific mechanisms. The relationship worked because the dog's natural behaviors in a home-based context with bonded individuals produced protective outcomes for those individuals. And the ancient pregnant woman's natural tendency to seek warmth, companionship, and reassurance brought her into the physical proximity with the dog that enabled all these mechanisms to operate. The domestication of dogs is sometimes framed as a story about utility. Dogs helped humans hunt, helped them herd, helped them pull sleds. These utilitarian functions are real, but the reproductive protective function, the specific multi-mechanistic protection that bonded dogs provided to pregnant women and new mothers at the most vulnerable point in the human reproductive cycle, may have been among the earliest and most consequential benefits of the human-canid relationship. Before dogs were working animals, they were sleeping near the most vulnerable members of the community, detecting threats those members could not detect, providing warmth those members needed, reducing stress those members were carrying, and watching over newborns with the behavioral heritage of a species that evolved to protect its own young. The dog at the entrance of that ancient shelter, apparently asleep, was doing something that mattered enormously. It still is.